HMS Media in Chicago is a 25-time Emmy Award-winning and critically acclaimed production company that creates broadcast, streaming, and cinecast content. I've seen some examples of Scott's work, our guest today, and I have been looking forward to this discussion all week. If you're in the Mukana system today and you see our Space for Second Hour questions of Scott listed, it's producing with intention, which really caught my eye because that really is one of the differentiators between just churning out content and understanding why you're churning out content and what good is it going to do people. I think it's a brilliant idea for the framing. So Scott, welcome to Office Hours. It is excellent to have you here.
Thank you. It's really great to be here. I appreciate this very much.
Well, I've been looking forward to this, as I said, all week long. I'm very excited to help our audience get a feel for the type of work you do. I wanted to start with the Looking Glass Alice project, where your team adapted the classic Lewis Carroll Alice in Wonderland through the Looking Glass themes, originally for the stage,
right,
incorporating things like theatrical lighting and sets, plus aerial acrobats, which is impressive enough. But then you had to transform that stage production into a PBS television program. Right. That seems a daunting task. Talk to us a little bit about the experience.
Daunting is exactly the right word, but that's kind of how I like it. I mean, my business partner and I are best friends from summer camp. We've known each other since we were 13 years old. And the thing that got us going as friends and collaborators way back in the day in the North Woods of Wisconsin, when we our first production wound up being a Camp Follies tribute to the Beatles, because it was the 70s and we were that second wave of Beatle fan and Beatlemania was raging on Broadway. So we did Beatlemania Mania and made films and, with 8mm movie cameras that we found around. We was a lot of found stuff. The idea of friends creating something out of nothing, first of all, the collaborative relationship out of nothing, and then making work. I mean, you shouldn't be able to, when you're 13 years old, you shouldn't be able to make, and bear in mind, this is the summer of 78, to make 8mm films that parodied Help in a Hard Day's Night and sync that up to a tape recorder, a cassette that you've somehow managed to make a little medley of Help in a Hard Day's Night and
as
perform
accurate
on stage.
As cassettes were.
Right, exactly. And I was a classically trained pianist. We were musicians and we figured out how to do all this stuff. So that dynamic always appealed to me. And so when Matt Hoffman and I lived in different cities, he grew up in Chicago, I grew up in Cincinnati. And when we would record the music we were writing, the third member, our pal John Meyer, the M in HMS, who did not come to work with us professionally, and the slacker that he is currently the general counsel for the Department of Homeland Security. So,
oh dear, what a terrible path through life.
On certain days, you might agree. But we would come to Chicago, and there was something about this city. The first thing I ever saw on stage in Chicago was the Second City. And, if you've never seen it, or if you don't know the brand, the Second City is a legendary improvisationally based comedy theater from which the likes of everyone in its earliest days, Mike Nichols, Elaine May, Joan Rivers was even part of that briefly. The classic Saturday Night Live team comes from this area. Bill Murray, John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Gilda Radner, John Candy was a part of this. And I wound up doing a PBS special with them about the making of a Second City show when Tina Fey and Rachel Dratch were just starting there. So this was my introduction.
Talent incubator.
Incredible talent incubator. And Chicago was like that too. We wound up working, with Steppenwolf Theater that Gary Sinise and Terry Kinney and Jeff Perry started, that included John Malkovich and Laurie Metcalf and Joan Allen. And the thing that all these have in common is that we were all just a bunch of people who found each other and said, let's stick together, almost like let's be a band. And let's keep making work. So when I saw Looking Glass, the Looking Glassers were all the same age. I moved to Evanston. They were at Northwestern University. I followed their work, became a huge fan, always wanted to be a part of it, and wound up, as HMS developed as a company that was creating broadcast and eventually streaming content for the arts. So we would create our own PBS specials, but we frequently get hired to come in and you've got 4 hours to capture X number of scenes for a show that has to get cut together quickly so that it can get promoted, marketed, advertised. And this is a great way to learn how to shoot live performance because you build from the inside out. You don't say, well, we're the TV guys, let's show up and we'll tell you how it's done. You've got a few number of hours. Usually this work was organically made work, meaning very rarely were we seeing we were usually seeing a brand new play or a brand new production of something. And so we got asked to shoot the first show Looking Glass was doing in its new space, an in the round show, an adaptation of Studs Terkel's book Race that David Schwimmer, a Looking Glass co-founder, was directing and adapting. And so working with Schwimmer, so I knew him a little bit, but this is where we got to know each other. And we had this fantastic shoot, which was just one yes and after another. Yes and being a parlance we use a lot in theater, in the arts, which simply means a reality is presented to you. You agree with it. That's the yes. And then you build on it. You contribute. That's the and.
The core of improv.
It's the core of improv. I think it's probably the core of life. If we had more yes and in the world, I think we'd be in a lot better place. And we all recognize that in each other. I was eventually invited to join Looking Glass as an artistic associate. And as all this is happening, we would work with clients, and the work we did was turning out really well. We honestly didn't know what we were doing. We were learning ourselves. Matt was somewhat trained in this. I was not at all. I was a psychology major from the University of Pennsylvania who'd studied classical piano. But there was something about this city and the opportunities that you want to meet with someone, you generally get to meet with someone. We would knock on doors, people would open those doors. You have to be good to sustain yourself. But, we found ourselves within the first few years of HMS working with the top dance music and theater companies, which was very much our wheelhouse. We were also starting to do social issue work as well, and realizing that we could simultaneously, as long as we had a great team, not just our ideas, but great shooters, editors, audio people, the people who were really buying into this, that we had the opportunity with cameras and edit suites and access to screens, we could get our message out there. Back then, access to screens meant knocking on the doors of broadcast outlets. And that's where we established our relationship first with WTTW in Chicago, a real innovator in the world of public television in many, many ways. And ultimately that success led us to do some things nationally on PBS. And we maintain both. There's sometimes strong reasons to do it locally and other reasons to do it nationally. But because it's always been very idea-based, relationship-based, very, very generative, we tend not to start with what's someone going to fund or what's going to sell. We start with this idea that really excites us. Looking Glass is exactly the same way. Frankly, the performing arts tends to work that way. Even in the commercial world, there are commercial producers. The responsibility is to make money for investors, but you got to put a creative team together, and ideally left to their own devices, it's going to be about the work and how the audiences are going to respond. So Looking Glass Alice, that the Alice in Wonderland stories are a big part of Looking Glass Theater. It's why the company's called Looking Glass. Schwimmer directed an adaptation of that got them to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival that led to the formation of the company. And so the opportunity to do this show that was supposed to be the summer of 2020, clearly that didn't happen. Number of things that summer, and this is where I could get to intentionality. We had all these ideas of things we were going to be doing. Looking Glass Alice was happening, and I'd hoped to find a way to get a capture there. I was supposed to get married March 22nd of 2020. When COVID happened, my wedding was put on hold. All the arts were put on hold. We're a company that works with the performing arts and social service organizations, and we were now no longer performing, nor were we being social. So what do you do if you decide? First of all, the big part of intentionality was, should we go on? I think if you don't ask that question, then it's, especially our company's 36 years old. If it's not a choice to go on, if it's just an obligation or responsibility, that can be as much of a drag as if you're in a marriage that just feels like an obligation. There's a reason I go through a ritual where every night I take off my wedding ring, and every morning I put it on and I actually say the words I do out loud. I kind of did it on a whim one morning, and it reminded me the power of words and the power of intentionality. I'm married to my best friend in the world, but I love choosing her every day, and I love choosing my stepkids every day, and I love choosing HMS. That was the challenge for, I think, a lot of us at COVID. And many of us left the profession, because maybe they felt they didn't have a choice. A lot of people felt in the performing arts, this is a hard life. I'm choosing something else. those of us that stuck with it, I think that sense of intentionality made us realize, we can now have conversations like, why do you like being a camera op? I love talking to our crew about that. Why still do that? Why do this? When you do something like Looking Glass Alice, where you're shooting it in the middle of a run, we can augment the lights a little bit. The only thing we really got to do there was spend some extra rehearsal time figuring out how to mic and demic the actors, all of whom are changing costume in this 90-minute show that doesn't stop. How do you the theater is a black box space that's in an alley configuration, so there's always audience in the shot. We needed a lot of cameras on one side and a couple on the other, and then flip it. Had to come up with a plan to make it look like one show with one audience. How do you do all of that stuff in the middle of a run where you will have approximately 0 camera rehearsals?
Nice.
So
there's so many things to
you better have an intention behind that, or it's not going to work.
Well, and that makes sense, and that's one of the things I was fascinated when I was reading up about you guys, because you're always asking why instead of just how do we do things, and I think there's a lot to explore here. Our brand is that we want to get our audience involved as much as possible, as quickly as possible. So I'm going to pop to a couple of our audience questions, and then I want to come back to this because I've got a bunch of questions you've already generated for me. So
appreciate that. Love it. Let's go.
That's okay, no problem. Alexander, let's get to our first audience question.
All right, the first question is from Graham Cardwell in Villamor, Portugal. When returning from holiday with a lot of footage that is basically the same, example skiing or scuba diving, where do you start with your storytelling and how do you develop it?
What an interesting. That question interests me on a bunch of levels. So returning from holiday with a lot. The two ways that I look at that question, one sort of taking the second part first, again, is that idea of intentionality. I'm trained to look for the story. Whatever I'm interested in is fine and is a motivating standpoint.
Are there keys that you use for that? Do you look for character? Do you look for beats or arcs?
Here's what I do. I take one of the many reasons I love being a Looking Glass company member is it armed me with this framework to address this question. Once you're a company member at Looking Glass, you can create work for the stage. You can propose work. We determine the work as an ensemble. We don't have an artistic director. In the same way this works at HMS, Matt and I, work very collaboratively with our team. But at Looking Glass, if you have an idea, you can write the script all the live long day. But before you do anything, you have to present to the whole company. You have to fill out a series of questions. And the first question is, why must this story be told? The next one is, why must it be told now? And then, why must we be the ones to tell it?
Fascinating.
It's a cool thing because, in a way that it feels when you have a great idea, it forces you to start thinking about other people. I'm a big both and person. Any of us who are either making work or driven to be the creative part of a larger vision. I hope it's not just about I want to be on stage or I love gear or audio fascinates me. I hope all those things are there. But why do this? Why do we want to be a part of this crew? Why do I want to tell this story? And so if you come back with beautiful footage of skiing and scuba diving, at that moment, it's just footage. It may be attached to a feeling that you have about it. But I think the next thing is, well, what is that feeling? Why do you want to share that feeling? Why is it, what was it shot for? There's a lot of that stuff. I'm just going to assume for the moment it's all high quality stuff, looks and sounds great, could be incorporated into any number of outlets, any different kinds of programs or distribution. What's the story? Why must it be told? Why must you tell it? Why must you tell it now? And
you're triggering me to think about a piece of the puzzle that I was taught early in my schooling, which was the treatment, which really dealt with some of this stuff in content creation. What's the big overview? What are you trying to get accomplished here? And it seems like you're constantly going back and checking yourself against what's the reason we're doing this whole thing?
Yeah, what's the reason, and what's the reason we're doing it now, and what's the reason we're doing it together? I was working on something that I recently figured out how to return to. And at the time, and I was initially working on it. I was adapting a series of essays that Nick Hornby had written. And I had an idea. I put a script together. We just workshopped it. We weren't even getting into anything huge yet. It was just sort of an exercise. And then COVID happened, and Black Lives Matter, and Me Too, and George Floyd was murdered. And, the question, why must this story be told and why must I tell it, took on new resonance, because why should I, a 50-something straight white guy, tell a story based on the writings of, at the time, a 30 and 40-something-year-old straight white guy about pop music? Like, who would care about it? And then, time goes by and you do all the things that you hope lead you to a good career, which is just lead the most interesting life possible, read all you can, listen to all you can. And I started hearing a trauma therapist talking about how all you do-gooder white liberals, you want to get all these people in a circle. You want everyone to have a kumbaya moment, shape, size, colors, creeds, and we'll all share and we'll all learn. He's like, knock that off. It's too traumatizing. You straight white folks don't even know how to talk to each other yet. I went, oh, okay, now there's a sense of intentionality. There are theater companies putting on shows assuming that they have to look demographically desirable, but we haven't figured out how to talk to each other yet. Theater is a great place to do that. Video is a great place to do that. So the world can often supply you that sense of intentionality. The scuba and skiing stuff, who knows? If it's about here's how you discover yourself, your passions, great. If it's about I sure would like there to still be a swimmable ocean and I'd like the world to be cold enough to ski, there's another intention. If it's just a celebration of self and friendship, right? So intention, that's where intention comes in well. Why must that story be told? Why is that footage meaningful? How can it be meaningful to you in a way that also resonates with audiences?
Well articulated. Let's go to our next question.
Next one's from Aaron Cody in St. Louis, Missouri. My broadcasting company is at the stage where our primary goal is being at least ready to create art by Q number 1. We get there maybe 50% of the time and actually create art maybe 10% due to mental fatigue. Any tips on raising these numbers?
Those aren't bad numbers.
So expectation management is a piece of this.
I mean, when you look at, metrics are kind of funny that way. And I get the point of the question, but I know, for example, I do a lot of work with Broadway, and historically, no matter what's happening in the world, historically, pretty much every season, 80% of Broadway shows don't recoup. And when they do recoup, it's not all Hamilton or Wicked money. So I kind of throw that out there. It's a little bit tangential to the question, but it depends on, there are people who get into the Baseball Hall of Fame, getting hits 29% of the time.
Yeah.
So I think it's the part of that question that interests me the most is the idea of mental fatigue, when everyone's fatigued, either individually or collectively, things feel a lot more like failure than if you're more energized by them. When I did work at the Second City, when I was producing this documentary, Second to None, which is this is the making of a review from first day of rehearsal through opening night, which was about a 5-month process and very intimate. Again, very, we had one intention and I discovered another intention at the end. But one of the things that I learned and helped me with that intention is that, these are the best improvisers, certainly in the country, arguably in the world. Improv and comedy as we know it is hugely influenced by the Second City. And here we were in the middle of it with complete unknowns at the time, but everyone in that cast was about to go someplace huge. Tina Fey and Rachel Dratch, most obviously, but the rest of them all did too. And not everything worked. And I would hear things like the best improvisers in the world have about a 70-75% hit rate. Meaning not that they helped create a scene that was funny or that lasted or that would make it into the show when they were in the rehearsal process, but that in that moment generated some kind of empathic response. So it was interesting in the moment. And that is considered part of the success rate. When we were making
Aaron, it's a fabulous thing. I just wanted to note two things. As you're hearing here, you may only have 50% and 10%, but you're interested in getting higher. which is your motivation. And I think that's just brilliant in your question as well. I mean, I love this setting of you think it's bad, but maybe it's not. Maybe you're performing really above the average. And the fact that you want to achieve even more than that is a wonderful thing for you.
I agree. That's why the mental fatigue part is interesting, because if the process itself is wearing you down or wearing the group down, I think that's worth looking at more than, because, the percentages are often very subjective. Like, what does that actually mean? Almost nobody feels ready when it's time to go. Defining success, some of the world's favorite films in the world were deemed failures.
Absolutely.
It's a Wonderful Life, Wizard of Oz.
Classic.
I just had a conversation with people like Blade Runner. What was it like to see Blade Runner in the theater? Was it packed? I'm like, no, there were like 4 of us. So success is really relative. The mental fatigue part, it speaks there. What it speaks to me is process, and I think process is a lot more interesting than result. It's really important not to stay too overly attached to specific outcomes. You might be losing the thing that is ultimately the gift in your process if you're focused on one particular outcome. I'm not suggesting that our friend from St. Louis is doing that. But when I see things like, well, we're only this successful and we're only that successful and it's really exhausting, then for me it's like, well, let's talk about your process. And that would require a whole other conversation. I would welcome more from the person who asked the question about that. But because the process again speaks to the intentionality. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing it with these people? You don't need to create with everybody. You can't create with just anybody.
Not at all to my surprise. We have a bunch of questions flooding in. So I would love to spend 15 or 20 minutes on each one of these, because I think all of these questions and the answers are worth it. But let's try to make it going through. Yeah, well, there's so much good content here. Let's just go to the next question and see what other thoughts are generated.
Yeah.
Next one's from Dave Trotman in Edmonton, Canada. I have attempted taking a play and making it into a video. What considerations for audience literacy come into play, both in choice of shots and interplay between players?
So give us your thoughts, and then Courtney wants to weigh in on this as well. But
I love this. I love this question. I think a mistake that often gets made is it's about coverage. How many cameras do we get in? I mean, ultimately you deal with you want to make sure you can see and hear everything. But my philosophy on making this is not that we're going to do a capture. I mean, if there was a less precious way to say this, I would put it on our website. I like to make responses to things rather than captures of things. The performing arts you cannot capture. It's a big giant beast, and the best way I think to go about it is to think of it in terms of telling the story of what it's like to be in the audience to see this show. Even if you're doing it over multiple performances, create a story of what was it like to be in the audience that literal day, or that day in quotes, so that you are constantly responding to what's happening, as opposed to, and this comes in very specifically when you're directing, and especially when you're editing. Whether you're at sports or a play or whatever, part of the idea is you're just a split second behind the action. The action happens and you chase it a little bit. And there's a little physical energy that goes into that. It's very visceral, it's emotional, it's mental. And, to allow the immediacy of again, whether it's the Super Bowl or Looking Glass Alice, very differently scaled things. The idea that you're doing something in response, I think is huge, because then that's when you're going to see the space between the players on stage. That's when you're going to be able to do something analogous to the energy between what's happening in the performance and the audience. Technically, you want all your ducks in a row for sure, and you have to do all that stuff, but it all has to be in response to your willingness to respond as an audience member, and to get a real sense of what it's like. Why are they responding to each other on stage? Like, know the play, know the musical, know why they did it. That'll help you a lot.
Courtney, you wanted to slip in here?
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question extending on this. When you're trying to put a scripted play, or maybe an improv play onto video, do you do it once with an audience, or maybe several times with the audience? Do you ever go back and shoot pickups after the audience is left to get the reverses and things that have the background would be the audience, so you fly a piece of scenery in behind somebody to get that one or two lines to make it more of a less of a stage performance and more of an experience? Or do you just blow that off and let the audience know, or let the viewer know, that this is a film before a live audience, kind of like they do that in sitcoms with, multi-camera sitcoms, where it's filmed before a live audience, but it's shot more like a regular video. And you do go back in those cases and pick up reverse shots and things that were missed during the performance itself.
A lot of times, I mean, for those shows, I think they're kind of going back and still, in the three camera, the Cheers, Seinfeld, Friends days, the pickups had more to do with, and they were really shooting plays in multiple locations. It's because they were really trying to keep that live energy going. And you can often feel when it's not. You can feel that in the edit. You can feel that in the laugh track. It's a great question that you just asked, because it is about intentionality. The idea for Looking Glass Alice was, what's cool about this is that it's live, right? If I suggest to the audience that it's not, or if I in fact make it not and try to reverse engineer it, I think the audience is going to figure that out. There would be something kind of dead about it. Looking Glass Alice requires an audience, and the audience requires the energy from Looking Glass Alice to be something. So with Alice, because there were a couple of physical things where there was an angle that was just dangerous to get unless we did a pickup. I think we did that twice. And one line that we just, out of the whole 100-minute show, there was only one line we couldn't quite figure out how to, in the course of shooting this in front of an audience, where we stopped and started the way they would for Friends or Cheers or, a multicam sitcom. But mainly it's the play. It's stop and start to adjust mics, and now the play. We never did it film style, where we never stopped. And, the only way this works is a reverse. We have to have cameras set up so I can get that reverse. I'm getting it in the pickup, that all 8 cameras at all times are on doing something. Nobody's
Sounds like energy flow is more important to you than strictly coverage.
Yeah, because strictly coverage can be kind of antiseptic. It can be relentlessly pleasant, and I think that's a key to people picking up remotes or
I want that T-shirt.
Yeah.
Bill, relentlessly pleasant.
Right? But I mean, that's a problem. I mean, when people talk about attention spans, and the problem is people's attention spans, I honestly think that the analogy I always draw is, if you've got a juggler who learned how to juggle 3 things, then over time learn how to juggle 6, and that's pretty impressive. And then kind of out of nowhere, all at once, a bunch of people put a circle around him with a bunch of folks who threw objects at him, some of which were knives, some of which were live, some of which were on fire, and the juggler drops everything, runs screaming, and gets out of the room. And we're like going, bad juggler. And we've thrown all sorts of stuff at them that should never be juggled in the first place. And, that's not, I feel we've done that with content, that the rush to make the content and the relative ease of doing it means that, on the one hand, we are looking around. I don't know if it's attention span so much as it is, because this is also the era of binge watching. If you've got me, you've got me. It's just earned me as an audience member. And so that's part of this as well. I'm one of thousands of options when I'm on, last December when Looking Glass Alice is on. It's my honor and responsibility to earn your attention for those, for the 2 hours that we had the 100-minute play and then a little behind the scenes. And I literally just found out, because sometimes ratings come slowly from PBS because of the way that content's distributed. The anticipation was maybe 500,000 to 600,000 viewers, and we got 1.7 million that stayed with us, and another 50,000 that are streaming, and now 4 million are watching it on Digital Theater Plus. So I feel like we did it. I think we did a really great job. We also picked the right show. That show works on screens. Not all of them do. I don't think every show should be shot.
And then in comedy,
sorry, go ahead.
In comedy, doesn't audience reaction really change the pace of the comedy, and also the reaction of the actors and the timing of the comedy, which is important. And so I guess without an audience, or if the audience isn't reacting to a certain joke or a certain word, it's going to change the timing of the performance depending upon the audience reaction.
Yeah, yeah. A lot this stuff, if it's on stage, it was designed to be in front of audiences. So again, you have to know your intentionality. When I've done things, I did a documentary about the history of Steppenwolf theater. We used a lot of archival pieces, but the idea there wasn't to show one show. One show doesn't tell you about the first 25 years of Steppenwolf. I like to do with television that which only television can do. Sometimes that means here's a show you could never see otherwise. Looking Glass Alice was part of is a 13-week run. It's not easily tourable. It's not going to get remounted a whole bunch of other places. If it really works for television, that's one reason to do it. But another thing you can do, I mean, well, here's you can't get backstage and hang out with John Malkovich and Laurie Metcalf and Jonah. You can't do that on a regular basis, right? You couldn't have access to that one weekend. You couldn't sit in on a process of how you make a show at Second City with Tina Fey. Let's do with television that which only television can do. And that, I think, helps us narrow down a lot of ideas that seem cool over lunch or in a conference room. We go, yeah, that's not going to make great television. We owe it to our audiences. We owe it to everyone's going to fund it or distribute it. I don't want to sell them something that they're going to regret,
Scott, I have actually one of mine. I've noticed two kind of conflicting themes lately. One is web content evolving towards shorter and shorter, so-called snackable content. Everybody's trying to get their little message into short things. The other I'm seeing is limited series where there's a much longer story arc than the traditional 90-minute or 2-hour movie. How do you address what I would call right-sizing a story, knowing the form and what this is good for?
Wow, what a great question. I think it's a question you start over every time you do it. There are some songs that from a musical standpoint, for example, this is a 2.5-minute pop song. This is not an album length side. You got to somehow know it by feel. You got to be really honest with yourself. I think this is why, honestly, I think the answer is surrounding yourself with really smart storytellers and story listeners. So that you can give it up to the best idea in the room. There are plenty of ideas that I felt really passionately about that haven't come to fruition yet. And the hardest part is, well, are they just not that good? Did they not work in this format? Is its time not come yet? There are some things that are absolutely perfect for a 60-second moment. And then there are some things that, it's got to be Lord of the Rings. And in fact, I prefer the extended cut because a lot of those were better. I think if it was simple, then was it Queeby? Was that the short-lived? It's all short form content. All
right.
You have to do
very tiny length.
Short episodes, short runs. It didn't work. And I think it was one of those things that I think was kind of reverse engineering based on habits and marketing and data. And I doubt there were any stupid people involved. A lot of really smart people fail. And I'm how smart I am is up to debate, but failure is a regular part of the gig, which is fine. You don't learn that much from success. You learn a lot more from failure. And so I think one of the lessons from that is it's just not as simple as people want short content. And it's not as simple as, boy, we'll make more money if the movie is 2 hours instead of 3. I think Marvel's a great example, right? I mean, when it's really locked in story-wise, it works, and people will sit for 3 hours for the Avengers, and they won't sit they'll be less satisfied with the shorter one where the story wasn't as cohesive.
Oppenheimer.
I think the most honest answer to a lot of it is, I don't know. But as a general rule, get yourself with people who will be honest with you and be honest with yourself. And often I think the answers are in front of us if we don't look so hard for them, if we sort of let them, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Next question.
Next one's from Kyle Hammond in Chicago, Illinois. How much education about theater as an industry takes up your day?
Kyle, we're going to have drinks and talk about this one. Because Kyle, I know if it's Chicago theater guy. A lot.
Are you constantly looking for the young people coming in and trying to help mentor them so that there's this flood of talent in, or do they just show up? Are you still seeing the young folks flooding into theater wanting to learn about it?
I think anytime there's a chance to get around someone younger, I try to take it. Not necessarily because I have something to teach them, but I'm pretty sure they'll have something to teach me. And
Amen.
that never stops. I mean, we were treated that way quite beautifully when we were in our 20s getting started here and given a lot of opportunities, and we got to open some people's eyes, and we never saw that as the young kids opening up old fogies' eyes. It was just, here we are, born at this time with this experience, and we'd like to be part of this. You know, my mentor throughout my entire career, my life basically, is a guy named John Kander. And some people might recognize the name Kander and Ebb, the songwriting team of Kander and Ebb. These are the guys who wrote the musical Chicago, Cabaret. These guys wrote New York, New York. John is 97 years old, working on a new musical, and gave me the time of day where I literally, he was my dad's summer camp counselor at the same camp that I met my business partner. Through a summer camp connection, he said, hey, you're in school in Philadelphia. Come to New York. Let's hang out. And that was the beginning of this idea, Kyle, to your question, of learn everything you can. This, you know, he was so curious about us as young songwriters. Why were we doing it? What did it mean? He listened to it. He loved our stuff. And over time, it's been 40 years since that relationship started. The education always happens. I mean, if I'm pointing cameras at it, if I'm making a living off of it, if I'm going to be in the edit suites with it, then I have to learn more. I will never have learned enough. There's 200 plus theater companies in Chicago, down from the 240 or so that were pre-COVID. But I can't keep up with all of them, let alone all the music, let alone all the dance. So it's constant. I read every day. I subscribe to trades. I watch stuff. It's why I end the day never feeling like I've done enough. You can't learn enough. You can't ever see enough, which is frustrating sometimes, but it's also really exciting because there's always something. Every day there's a chance where you can look and listen to something and go, I didn't know that, or that gave me a new idea. And that's cool.
Next question.
Next question is from me. I find that when speaking to a lot of people interested in creating content online, be it YouTube or podcasts, their creative intent always seems hollow. For example, I want to have followers, or I want to make money. How do you switch their thinking?
I guess it's more like how do I invite them to switch theirs? Because I don't know that I'll have a lot of power over that. But it's a great question. I remember I was asked to do some guest speaking down at Columbia College here in Chicago. This was a dance, a group of dance majors, and by this point, I think we produced maybe 4 or 5 PBS specials on various Chicago dance companies, and I asked them how many of them wanted to start their own company, and probably a third of the room raised their hands. And I pointed to one and said, "Why do you want to start your own dance company?" And this person said, well, I love dancing. Dancing's important. It's how I express myself, how we connect the world. Yes, absolutely. We need all the great dancers we can get. The question was, why do you want to start your own dance company? And the room was kind of quiet, and I pointed to someone else, and they said, well, I love choreographing. I know how I express myself and the importance of body and movement. Yes, absolutely. How we move is vital. We learn a lot about ourselves that way. We need great choreographers. But again, the question was, why do you want to start your own company? So again, we come down to intention. That person wanted to dance, that person wanted to choreograph, and somebody needs to have the company that can responsibly hire and pay them to do that. If you start by saying, I want to make money, I mean, I don't want to dismiss that. I'm wildly in favor of food, clothing, and shelter. So it's once you establish, like, yes, of course, I think sometimes that translates into, I want to get rich off of this, or I want to get rich quickly, or I'm going to get a bunch of followers. And then by the time I'm 30, I will be rich and famous. First of all, fame sucks. I know I've only met one famous person that I felt really enjoyed being famous, and I did not want to hang out with that person after that one day shoot.
Oh, rats! I was going to ask you who it was, but with the second half of that, I'll let you keep it private. But
I mean, I get to work with a lot of famous people, and they don't, it often gets in the way of the work, and they have to learn how to use the kind of this. I think I heard Bono talk about, it was Bono or George Clooney. They were in an interview together. They talked about fame basically gives you a celebrity credit card. What are you going to do with it? Because the fame itself, like the success itself, you're not going to learn that much from. So like aiming for the success, that's that attachment to outcome thing. It's not that you don't want a lot of followers. It's not that you don't want to make a lot of money off of it. I'll point to Looking Glass Alice again. We wanted to tell Looking Glass Alice, David Catlin, who adapted and directed it, and Sylvia Hernandez de Stasi, who worked a lot of the acrobatics in with him, they had very specific intentions of why this story and why is it important to tell it. This is the fourth time Looking Glass mounted it. Why do it multiple times? I had an idea, like, I think this is something that audiences, general audiences want. I took my kids to it, and they saw things in it that I didn't, that really moved me. I, as a parent, saw it differently than I did when I was single. All of which is to say that we really wanted to tell this. We had a relationship with public television. We thought this could make a difference. It's the same intention that went back to our very first documentary, which was it turned out to be the first broadcast doc about survivors of rape and sexual assault. It was a story we were responding to on personal and social levels. We thought, we were a couple straight white guys in our 20s. Nobody's talking to us about this issue, and it's people who fit my description who are perpetrating it most of the time. What are we going to do? We thought we were making a training tape. We were learning how to make video and volunteered it for a not-for-profit. No idea it was going to turn into a Emmy-winning PBS special. It was the lack of attachment to outcome in a way that was really helpful there. With Looking Glass Alice, listen, the gig, we pitched it to PBS. We knew there was a certain outcome, right? It's going to be on PBS on a Friday night for their arts programming. But the intention wasn't, I work with a lot of Broadway shows. My first intention wasn't to go to Lin-Manuel and say, hey, we've shot Hamilton on tour. First of all, I already know the Radical Media guys did a really nice job for Disney+. But, the idea was, here's something that will really resonate. And so there was a huge chance there. And PBS took a huge chance, and they were a little nervous about it, but did it to their great credit. So,
which brings up the risk. How do you talk to them about risk management when you're dealing with a controversial subject that it needs delicacy in handling?
You just try to be honest and receptive and listen and find the right people. Like, you don't need 50 people to distribute your work. In the same way, you don't, if you really want a relationship, if you really want to get married, ideally you just one will do, right? So
hopefully,
how do you find that person? And in the same way, how do you find that person you want to work with? And I think in distribution and funding, it's that way too. It helps me narrow down who I want to talk to about funding by what they've done with their money or what kind of business are they in. Public television has a charter. They have a mission. They have vision and values. We can talk at length about people's feelings about have they lived up to it, or what are they doing, or who is it for. But I've worked with them closely and on the local and the national level, and their mission is to be relevant to their audiences, to their community, to the times. It's why I prefer their news. It's amazing what you can do when profit isn't your motive. Right. I don't mean everyone there wants to, everyone wants to be able to live in a house and buy food and send their kids to college or whatever.
Yeah, you need to keep the ship afloat one way or another.
Yeah, but what kind of work do we really want to do? And so who gets drawn to that and who winds up distributing it? Now, it doesn't always work out perfectly in any of those situations. But again, you look at intention. What do they want? Of all the people who are willing to take a chance on that story, on the Why Am I Hiding, the doc on rape and sexual assault, the only people that said they would talk to us about it, that they really felt they could make it work, was Chicago's public television station, WTTW, where it premiered. And the good that happened, we listed several social service organizations at the end of the program, hoping a few people would watch. It was late night. It was the subject. This is 1989. It's bizarre that that's the first time that subject could have been addressed in a broadcast doc, but we did it. They aired it, and tens of thousands of people saw it and were called, just in Chicago when it premiered, called social service organizations to get help. And we went, okay, that's what we're in it for. Now, if you're in it, if you want to be famous, God bless. If you want a lot of money, some people break that big. I just think it's just, your odds are better if you are in touch with why you're doing it and who you're doing it with and why this is important now. Otherwise, go to a casino or buy a lottery ticket, because I do think that's the only way. That's your odds of getting rich and famous are probably about as good.
Yeah, pretty equal. Next question.
Next question is from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Limitations often force creative solutions. What new art forms or techniques did you see come out of the COVID shutdown of the performing arts?
I love that question, Roscoe. Well, I think I can look at it in two ways. One is that what we do in the performing arts, what we've learned, I mean, you're always in limitations. You're always facing limitations, when you are putting something live on stage, right? The time-space continuum is always against you. There's always, here's what we're aiming for, and we're never going to get there. We're going to hopefully get here. We might get down here. And what sustains you in this career is if you can find the distance between here and here, if you can find that interesting, you're in the right, you're in the right business. We're always under budget and time constraints in the kind of television that we do, working with the performing arts, and they always are as well. So, I think we learned that what we do is vital and adaptable to the world. And it's one of the reasons that as we move into what I've just been calling HMS's next act, it's informed by the fact that, man, when we go into any given theater, the circumstances that can change, the orchestra pit's flooded. What do? We have to push everything back 8 hours, or, someone's sick, or, the power went out, which, happens sometimes. I think what I learned was that the keys to a lot of moving through this, because we're not going back, there's nothing to go back to. We only go in one direction. Going through it, I think the keys lie in the field that we're in already. What I've learned is the power of improvisation, the power of adaptability, the power of what happens when people can agree that in every crisis there is an opportunity, in every obstacle there is a gift. We have to find it, and we have to find it now. And that allowed us to very quickly, I don't even want to call it pivot. We just found new ways and new people who were interested in getting content in front of cameras and on screens to help sustain. I think we learned if we learn something, it's this stuff can really work on screens and people will watch it. The numbers, the data is there. People were already interested in seeing the arts on screens in greater and greater numbers before COVID.
And I'll just note that the reason that you're on office hours right now is the pandemic. That's how we started. Everybody was displaced and we didn't know what to do. So we gathered together, and there were a lot of teachers who didn't know anything about streaming. So we helped them out for a while. The next thing you know, here we are at show 1600 and what is today? 1604 or something like that every single day. Well, then you're living it out. A community.
The answer's right here, and because this works, this could never have happened before. We would have done something, but it wouldn't have been this, right. And I wouldn't have been talking in the course of. I wouldn't have this conversation, and I wouldn't have talked to people, from the UK to Indiana, Missouri,
utterly
all are today.
The number of friends I have from all over the world now, just because of sitting here every day in my room talking on this show, has been exponentially an improvement in my life. It's just the biggest joy of what we do is this outreach and knowing all the people that you see every day here. It's just fabulous.
It is fabulous. And here's the other thing I could probably fold with the other thought into another question. So let's go to another.
Okay, let's go to another question. That's our purpose here. So we're going to keep answering audience questions. Go for it.
Aaron Cody in St. Louis, Missouri asks, being dedicated to difference makers often comes with a particular set of challenges, including high expectations, low budgets, and unique personalities, among others. How do you produce meaningful events sustainably?
In 25 words or less, and why?
I don't know. My answer is maddeningly abstract, and it's a repeat. How you do it, I guess, you do it sustainably. Again, surround yourself with the right people, lead the most interesting life possible, and be open to things you never thought of. That's maddeningly abstract, and I apologize for that, but I don't necessarily know a better answer. Those are all. What I'm suggesting is a yes and response to every yes, high expectations, yes, often low or lower than normal budgets. And the unique personalities part actually I think is great. I think people in the performing arts get a bad rap for, quote unquote unique personalities. I know a lot of doctors and lawyers and dentists and postal workers. We all have unique personalities. These folks are on stage and in front of cameras. It's vulnerable, and the job is to tell a story in a meaningful way. And how to do that, this is why I like working in Chicago. Amy Morton, if you live in Chicago, you know Amy Morton's one of the great actors you're ever going to see. If you watch Chicago PD, she has a supporting role in that as well. She's an astonishing actor. She said, my favorite thing about working in this city, in Chicago, as an actor, you're not going to get rich, you're not going to get famous, you're just going to get good. And so, my answer is get good. That's how you do it sustainably. Have great relationships with smart people. Aim high. I aimed for Steppenwolf. When it was theater, I aimed for Steppenwolf Goodman and Looking Glass and Chicago Shakes. Sometimes they found us, in fact. We aimed for lyric opera. We aimed for the Chicago Symphony. For Broadway, Hamilton and Wicked, these are all our clients. You aim high and then put yourself in a position to earn them. And be open to the different ways things might be sustainable. I thought I was moving to Chicago to become a musician. It turns out that I had more interests and abilities than that. I don't always believe in them, but I surround myself with people who more often than not believe in me on my behalf, and that's what will get me through. There's a saying that, you're only as strong as the weakest link. And I've learned here that actually you're only as strong as the group's capacity to compensate for whoever in that moment might be the weakest link. Because if it's not you right now, it's going to be you. It could be you an hour from now. So it's all very, very relationship based. I do think another thing that's helpful is understand the power of the sector that you're in. One of the things that helps the sector sustain, and therefore we sustain in it, is this knowledge that, look, some people will say, people get horrified that we're in show business, or you're going to go do the arts, or how are you going to make money? Look, this is a $1 trillion sector of the American economy. All right. It's bigger than manufacturing. It's bigger than transportation or warehouse or agriculture, right? It employs 5 million people. It's 4.4% of the GDP. It makes money for people. The not-for-profit side makes money for people. Somebody might say, well, we got to cut. Somebody who might say wanting to make the business argument, the financial argument. $200 million for the National Endowment for the Arts. Boy, that's, first of all, that's pennies on the dollar. It's about a third of what Ohtani gets paid to play for the Dodgers. But here's the more interesting thing about it. The not-for-profit arts in this country generate $13 billion of tax revenue to the federal government. 200 million out, 13 billion back. That's the sector we're in. We all participate that in some way. So some of the times what sustains is that knowledge. When someone says, why would you study that in school, whether it's the tech side, whether it's creative with gear, with television or video or on stage, the data's there. Test scores go up, dropout rates decrease, job opportunities increase, your health increases. So the sustainability aspect of this is not simply us individually in our groups. The more cohesive we are as a sector, the more capable we are as advocating for this sector as an enormous vital part. It's the beautiful thing about it. I've done a lot of arts advocacy work in DC. When you go to the Hill and talk to congressmen or senators, just look at the walls, look what's on their bookshelves. You'll see what they're interested in. Whatever they're interested in, if you're advocating on behalf of this field, you've got something for them. Watch what happens to veterans who come back from Afghanistan when they get arts-based care. That's the best possible way to deal with PTSD. Watch what happens. Renee Fleming does a beautiful thing with her Music and Mind program. Watch what happens to someone with severe brain injury or a stroke or dementia. When you introduce music as part of their therapy, they always improve. Sometimes they heal almost completely. It's astonishing what this field can do. So I think that's an important aspect of sustainability as well, is remember what field you're in, which will also, by extension, give you many more ways to consider how you can participate in it.
Let's go to our next question.
Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana asks, do you agree that film often employs all the visual and performing arts and thus is the highest and most influential art form?
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
Fighting words.
Gosh, I don't know. I guess it's a question of perspective. Certainly people are going to see more TV and film than they are going to see, a lot of stage productions. But in terms of the power of the form themselves, look at toddler kids are singing and dancing before they're walking and talking. I think the forms themselves, the art itself is in us. I think it's part of what makes us human. I think the fact that we've detached ourselves from it, and we prove that self all the time, because the arts are about the first thing that's going to get cut from, the budget of your choice, is a very explicit and bizarre rejection of not only what makes us human, but what's going to sustain us in whatever we do. And you'll find people who, lawyers who had an arts background will tell you that they're better at their job and like it more and are often way more successful at it. You can, again, a lot of data on that. In terms of influential, I don't know. I mean, I feel like probably music is maybe the most, because it's now, I guess, for both better and worse, ubiquitous. It can be anywhere. It's the art form I think that is the most meaningful to me and most inspiring to me. But I've also been massively changed by any kind of story. I'm sure I've seen more, I've taken in more on screens than live, which is saying something. I don't know. I don't like to rank, because I think it depends on who you are, depends on where you live, what you have access to. I think what the question makes me think about the importance of accessibility. Not everyone has an opportunity. For some people, it's just hard to get to the movies, let alone get to a live show, be able to afford that live show. I'd like to see us figure out how to democratize that more, so that we have our choice of all of these things. That said,
Plus, the question itself may be a little dangerous. It's kind of like, which of your kids do you like best? Alexander had a follow-up question he wanted to get into here, too.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on this, because for me, I love movies, film. I think that's deeply important, and I watch it all the time. But I've also been to musicals before, and I feel like they're both valid, but they hit a different part of your brain. Like, I just remember, and this was hugely important to me, when I was 9 years old, I saw Phantom of the Opera live for the first time. And that experience was so visceral to me. I mean, they had pyrotechnics. I could feel the flames hitting my face. Like, that was so visceral, and it hits a different part of you that you just have to see it. You have to be there to really experience it. So I think they're both valid.
I think you're absolutely right. And Phantom is one of those shows. I had a conversation after we did a PBS, a tribute to Kander and Ebb. There were some folks who were talking with about what our next PBS project would be. And I still want to bring this to the screen, is this fantastic show called Peter and the Starcatcher. It was adapted from a Dave Barry book by Rick Ellis, a fantastic writer who did Jersey Boys and a bunch of other stuff. The late, great Roger Rees co-directed along with Alex Timbers. And, the show was very much like what we do at Looking Glass. I'm sure how it responded to it. Great source material and told in this really inventive way, which was like no pyrotechnics at all. It was the flip side of that, which also made it great, because Phantom of the Opera, I mean, the spectacle of the theater and the chandelier crashing, you got to be in that theater to really dig that. But what was also great about Peter and the Starcatcher, on the other hand, is you could be in the audience and see people do stuff with flashlights and rope and bicycles and ladders, and you could share the thrill of, oh, I could go home and make a show like this. Peter and the Starcatcher, I know, would translate beautifully to screens. Phantom, on the other hand, and this was a specific conversation we had, someone said people want the spectacle of Phantom. I'm like, well, I've shot Phantom. It's great in the house, but if I'm going to point a camera at the chandelier, you have to be there for that moment. On camera, it's almost, I think I would dissuade you from going live when you see these things happen in front of you, or the helicopter in Miss Saigon, or just the power of those voices and that story. Like, oh my God, that's happening in front of me right now. That person really just had the mask ripped off. There's nothing like either one of them. I go back to both. And, I would love to go to the movies in the afternoon, go to a ball game later in the afternoon, and go to opera or musical at night. I mean, one makes me want the other. It's like food. I don't want to just eat one kind of food. I want to find a way to eat healthy, but I really want to dig it.
Just going to let the back end crew know that we're going to go a little bit over, because this is a fascinating discussion. We've got two more questions to get to. Let's get to the first of these two.
Yeah.
Next one's from Dave Trauman in Edmonton, Canada. How do you plan when shooting dance where it actually shows the dancers and not just some great cuts?
You show the dancers and don't worry about the great cuts. I think. Everything has to be in service to the art form. And there are times where holding on one Steadicam shot is exactly what that choreography calls for. It's the best way to replicate it. The last thing I want to do is remind people they're watching television. our editor Christy Fall, who edited Looking Glass Alice, who's brilliant. When she came in, we had an opening editing position. It was her and one other guy. The guy came in and we gave them this assignment. We gave him footage we had just shot a little night music on Broadway with Catherine Zeta-Jones and Angela Lansbury. And the assignment was take all this footage, create a montage, and then create a cut of the song, Send in the Clowns. We'll see in a couple hours. He showed me that he knew Avid inside out. He knew everything about it, and every way he did that showed me I want this job, and so I'm going to show you what I know. Christy didn't know, was coming in, just learning Avid for this gig and was more Final Cut at the time. And so her montage started, and it was started very slow, but I realized right away, it is exactly mirroring the music. Christy is brilliant at images that match the flow and tempo of music. And it built with the music, and I loved it. And then her clip of Send in the Clowns was an establishing shot. She hung on one Steadicam shot of Catherine Zeta-Jones the whole time, and then back to an establishing shot. I said, wow, so 3 shots. Tell me about that. And she said, it's just what it needed. And I went, oh God, this is our person. So, you don't worry about, you use your cameras and your edit suites to honor what's on stage. Always build it from the inside out. And if you find yourself over editing, stop and have people you work with who can sit down with you and go, that's a lot of edits. Why don't you start over?
Let it breathe.
Yeah.
Last question.
Last question's from Rion Smith in Trinidad, West Indies. Living on a Caribbean island, most productions tend to cut back or limit the risk they take in doing newer ideas of production. 2024 and our Carnival celebration is done and shown the same way since I was a kid. How can we influence this change?
That's a great question.
How do you build credibility for saying we want to change things when there's so much ossified thinking out there?
It sounds really icky for me to say I empathize with it because, again, I recognize the privilege that I have in all of this. But I can empathize with, in some small way, to honor the question of, how do you speak truth to power? How do you rattle cages to let people inside them know that we should dismantle them and try something new? I wish I had a good answer for it other than persistence and faith and love and relationships and advocacy. I think, I would encourage everybody, wherever you're living, find your national and your regional, whether that's city or state, find your advocacy organizations. Here in Illinois, I'm on the board of Arts Alliance Illinois, is one. I'm joining a group called the Chicago Cabinet, which is kind of a smaller private group intended to do this. Americans for the Arts. These are all organizations that I would encourage everyone to Google. There's a lot of tools in there that help people understand what it is we're doing and why we're trying to do it, and paths to elected leaders. I don't know what that's like. And the question came from Trinidad. Is that right?
Yeah, Trinidad.
I don't know. I don't know what the access there is, but I've found that getting used to living your life as an advocate tends to it's armed me and my colleagues with ways to be able to speak to people in the language that matters to them. So we were talking about some of the advocacy stats before. If you're trying to, I don't know, we were trying to get Congressman Adam Kinzinger on board with some NEA stuff. That's not really the top of his priority list when he was in office. Again, but we talked to him from the lens of veterans, and it was. We've been able to help get bills to the floor to advance, for things like wireless microphones. The white spaces issue is a big one. A lot of tech issues change, and we need legislation behind them. Advocacy helped give us paths to people who make those decisions. And I think the heart of the question is, how do we either shake up is it a group of people, the same group, who won't let things change? Or is it, which is really hard, but those people eventually go away because nature has a way of making that happen. Or is it this tradition that's kind of passed on? This is how we do it. And that's its own really tricky way. Building an advocacy-based community, I think is key to a lot of this. It's slow. It's not going to necessarily mean you get that gig and change it next year. And I don't know if you have the means to do something on your own that might change it, a documentary around it, for example, that might show how people want and what they want from it. A lot of ways to go about it. It's easy for me to say this, and trust me, I know it's really hard, and I know this is a frustrating answer, but get advocacy.
Actually,
and
you got a reaction from Rian in
it.
the chat. He said, "Living long and not going away." LOL.
That's it. Yeah, they should have you on next time because you're going to say this stuff in a shorter and pithier fashion than me. So yeah,
he's part of the back end crew here. We love Rian.
Well,
anyway. Scott, this has been a fabulous hour. Thank you. I hope we can get you back on again to talk about this stuff before, because there's nothing more that I love than a discussion on the arts, the nature of them, where they're going, and what they're up to. Anything you'd like to finish just mentioning before we take off and do our close?
Just gratitude for the chance to have the conversation. Anytime, listen, if you want me back, I'm delighted and honored because the chance to talk about it in any kind of context. I know we're talking with a lot of people who make this work and want to feel inspired by it and we do at our heart want to change the world. And if a bunch of us are doing it, a few molecules at a time, even if we're not directly collaborating, but we have more opportunities to support each other, anybody who sent a question today, email me. I want to see your stuff. I'd like to show you our stuff because I'll probably have something to learn from what you think of our stuff. So yeah.
Is there a way they can reach out to you? Is there an address or something like that?
Yeah, easiest way via our website, which is hmsmedia.com, or where all our contact info is there. Of the whole team, and you'll see some samples of our work, including Looking Glass Alice. Or email me directly. It's Scott, SCOTT, at hmsmedia.com.
Excellent.
I'd love to hear from people.
Thank you so very much. It's been a pleasure to have you.
I love the questions.
Here.
I love the vibe of this. You guys are great to me. I'm very grateful. I appreciate it.
Well, we thank you for being here and helping us do this every day.
Anytime.
Our thanks to our producers. Our producers are everybody who inputs questions into the show every day. We have done literally tens of thousands of questions, and the back end has them indexed and searchable and things like that. That requires the huge behind-the-scenes group that help us produce this show every day, and we are hugely impressed with every day and appreciative of that back-end crew. And the panelists who show up here every day, people who just volunteer their time, come in for an hour or 2 hours just to answer questions and try to help everybody kind of move the industry along little by little as we go through each day. We appreciate each and every one of you. After Hours goes 24/7, even when the show is on. So if you want to get your questions answered, you can pop into After Hours. And we will see you tomorrow on the show. Thanks for watching. Credits rolling. Scott, thank you so much. That was fun. I really enjoyed that. I had 12 more questions that we didn't even get close to.
I appreciate that. Anytime you want to talk it's so, this is talking about this stuff I find is really the closest I can come to think of it. It's like talking about, why I love my wife. I either have too few words or too many. So thanks for dealing with too many, but like this stuff is in my core. And it's how I'm moving through the world. So I appreciate your patience with some of the longer answers. Sometimes I don't know where to, it's so huge.
Problem.
I'm in the middle of it.
It was all good content.
Right.
Some things have to be talked about at length. You can't shorten them.